My name is Madison, I'm 32 years old, and last Sunday destroyed my entire world. Standing frozen outside my parents' kitchen, I heard my father's voice. Don't worry about the medical bills, Ethan. We'll make Madison pay for everything. My mother's laughter followed. She's always been the responsible one. My wealthy brother's relief was palpable. Blood roared in my ears as I realized my family had been plotting against me for years. The people I'd sacrificed everything for saw me as nothing but their personal ATM. What they didn't know. This was the last time they'd underestimate me. If you're watching from a place where family has taken advantage of you too, know you're not alone. I never thought I'd be sharing a story like this. But sometimes the people closest to us reveal their true colors in ways we never imagined. Like this video if you've ever felt betrayed by family. And subscribe to join others who understand what it's like to rebuild after betrayal. Now let me tell you how everything unfolded. Growing up in Portland, Oregon. Our family presented a picture-perfect image to the outside world. My parents, Harold and Diane Brooks, owned a moderately successful hardware store that supported our comfortable middle-class lifestyle. From the beginning, however, there was an unmistakable difference in how my brother Ethan and I were treated. Ethan, 3 years my senior, was the golden child from day one. He received the newest toys, the latest technology, and seemingly endless parental attention. When he showed interest in baseball, my parents hired a private coach. When he wanted to attend summer camp, they sent him to an exclusive program in the Catskills. Meanwhile, I wore hand-me-downs and was told to be grateful for what I had. Your brother has special potential, my mother would say whenever I questioned the disparity. He's going to do great things someday. The pattern continued throughout our education. When Ethan was accepted to Cornell University, my parents liquidated investments to pay his full tuition and housing. They even bought him a car so he wouldn't have to take public transportation. For my education at Portland State University, I received a pat on the back and instructions to apply for student loans. College is an investment, my father explained. Ethan's degree in finance will pay off enormously. Your physical therapy program is nice, but more modest in potential. Despite the unequal treatment, I remained close to my family. I chose my career partly because I genuinely loved helping people recover their strength and mobility, but also because I knew someday my parents might need that expertise. I rented an apartment just 15 minutes from my parents' home while Ethan moved to New York after graduation, landing a position at a prestigious investment firm. His visits home became increasingly rare. Christmas, maybe Thanksgiving if his vacation plans to Aspen or the Bahamas fell through. Each time he returned, it was with designer luggage and stories about his luxury condo, exotic travels, and influential friends. My parents would listen enraptured, as though their son were royalty gracing them with his presence. Isn't your brother amazing? My mother would whisper to me while Ethan regaled my father with tales of closing million-dollar deals. We always knew he'd be special. 5 years ago, my father began showing symptoms of Parkinson's disease. His hands trembled when ringing up customers, and his once confident stride became a shuffling gait. The diagnosis was devastating, but not entirely unexpected given his family history. What was unexpected was how quickly the family business began to struggle without his full capabilities. As my father's condition worsened, I started spending evenings and weekends helping at the store. I'd finish my shift at the rehabilitation center, then drive straight to the hardware store to manage inventory, help customers, and balance the books. Meanwhile, my mother became increasingly focused on my father's care, learning to administer his medications and accompanying him to doctor appointments. "We're so blessed to have you nearby, Madison," she would say, squeezing my hand. "I don't know what we'd do without you." Ethan's response to our father's illness was to send an occasional check, substantial enough to impress, but never enough to make a real difference with the mounting medical expenses. He'd call once a month, speaking briefly with our father before making excuses about meetings or social engagements. "Your brother is very busy," my mother would defend him. "He's building his future. And those checks he sends are very generous." Last year, when my father's tremors became so severe he could no longer drive, I began taking him to his weekly therapy sessions. When the store finally had to close because my parents couldn't manage it anymore, I helped them organize the liquidation sale and pack up 30 years of inventory and memories. Through it all, Ethan remained in New York, offering sympathetic words during brief phone calls. "It's tough, but these things happen," he said when I called to tell him about the store closing. "At least they have you there to help out. I've got back-to-back meetings for the next 3 weeks. But I'll try to visit soon." 6 months passed before he made good on that promise. The financial pressure on our family intensified as my father's condition deteriorated. The sale of the business had provided some cushion, but specialized treatments not covered by insurance quickly eroded their savings. I started picking up extra shifts at the rehabilitation center and taking weekend clients for additional income, much of which went toward groceries for my parents or copays for my father's medications. Through it all, I never questioned my role. They were my parents. This was what family did for each other. Or so I thought. 2 weeks ago, Ethan finally came home for our father's 65th birthday. He arrived in a brand new Tesla, wearing a watch that probably cost more than my annual salary, bearing gifts of expensive whiskey for our father and designer perfume for our mother. For me, he brought a scented candle, the kind you might give to an acquaintance or distant relative. "Sorry I couldn't think of something better for you, sis," he said with a dismissive smile. "I know you're not really into fancy stuff anyway." The family home where we gathered for the birthday celebration was the same 2-story colonial where we'd grown up. Once immaculately maintained, it now showed signs of neglect, peeling paint on the shutters, overgrown garden beds my mother no longer had energy to tend, a leaking faucet in the kitchen my father could no longer fix himself. I'd offered to help with repairs, but between work and caregiving, there simply wasn't time. As we sat around the dining table that evening, eating the meal I'd prepared after a full day at work, I couldn't help but notice how my parents still hung on Ethan's every word. His stories of boardroom triumphs and weekend getaways to the Hamptons seemed to transport them from their worried existence. Meanwhile, my father's hand trembled so severely he could barely lift his fork, and my mother looked exhausted from the constant vigilance his condition required. Little did I know that in less than 24 hours, I would discover just how deep the family divide truly ran, and how thoroughly I'd been deceived by the people I loved most. The morning after my father's birthday dinner, I arrived at my parents' house earlier than expected. I'd promised to take my father to a new neurologist appointment, but the rehabilitation center had called to say my first patient had canceled. Rather than wait at my apartment, I decided to head over early and help my mother with breakfast. I used my key to enter through the side door, calling out softly in case my father was still resting. No one answered, but I heard voices coming from the kitchen, my mother's concerned tone, my father's slower, more deliberate speech pattern, and Ethan's confident tenor. Not wanting to interrupt what sounded like a serious conversation, I paused in the hallway. "These new treatments are experimental," my mother was saying. "Insurance won't cover them, but Dr. Phillips thinks they could significantly slow the progression." "How much are we talking about?" Ethan asked, his voice sharp with what I recognized as his business negotiation tone. "40,000 for the initial round," my father replied, the slight tremor in his voice making the words even more impactful. "Then monthly follow-ups at 2,000 each." There was a long whistle from Ethan. "That's a significant amount. I've got the condo mortgage, the club memberships, and I'm looking at investing in a vacation property in Vail this year." I felt a flicker of anger. My brother made more in annual bonuses than I earned in 3 years, yet he was hesitating over our father's medical care. I was about to step in when my mother spoke. "Don't worry about the money, Ethan. We'll make Madison pay for everything." The words hit me like a physical blow. "She's already handling most of the day-to-day expenses anyway," my father added. "And this way, we can keep the assets we've transferred to your name protected." My heart began pounding so loudly I was certain they would hear it. "You're sure she won't push back?" Ethan asked. 40,000 is a lot to ask, even from Madison. My mother's laugh was light, dismissive. Madison has always been the caretaker. It's the role she was meant for. Besides, we've been preparing her for this her entire life. Your sister has always been more practical than ambitious, my father added. She chose a stable, helping profession for a reason. This is her contribution to the family, while yours is to build and maintain the Brooks family wealth for the future. We've already started setting things up, my mother continued. I added her name to some of the medical accounts last month, and she didn't even question it. I've been paying some of the smaller bills with her credit card when she leaves her purse in the hall. What about the house? Ethan asked. Is that still coming to me? Of course, my father replied. The transfer is already in progress. The trust is structured so Madison gets lifetime caregiving responsibilities while the assets flow to you. It's best for everyone this way. She's always been happy with less, my mother added. It's just her nature. My legs began to tremble so violently I had to lean against the wall. Nausea rose in my throat as 32 years of family dynamics suddenly crystallized with perfect, horrible clarity. I wasn't the responsible one. I was the designated sacrifice. With my heart shattering into 1,000 pieces, I silently retreated down the hallway and out the side door. In my car, parked around the corner, I finally allowed myself to break down, sobs racking my body until I could barely breathe. When my phone chimed with a text from my mother wondering where I was, I composed myself enough to reply that I'd been delayed at work but would be there soon. Somehow, I made it through the neurologist appointment, nodding mechanically as Dr. Phillips discussed treatment options. I watched my father's eyes light up with hope at the possibility of slowing his disease, and my mother squeezing his hand supportively. All the while, their earlier conversation echoed in my mind like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. That evening, unable to face returning to my apartment where I'd just be alone with my thoughts, I drove to a coffee shop and opened my laptop. With shaking hands, I logged into the joint bank account I'd set up with my parents for emergencies. The transaction history revealed regular transfers to accounts I didn't recognize, dating back nearly 2 years. The next day, while my parents were at my father's physical therapy session, one I'd arranged and paid for, I returned to their house. This time, I went straight to my father's home office. The filing cabinet that had once been meticulously organized was more haphazard now that his fine motor skills had declined, making it easier for me to search without detection. What I found confirmed my worst fears. Deed transfers showing the family home being moved into a trust with Ethan as the sole beneficiary. Investment accounts systematically emptied and re-established in my brother's name. A life insurance policy on my father listing Ethan as the beneficiary, with the annual premiums charged to an account bearing my name. Most devastating was a letter from their estate attorney, dated 3 years ago, before my father's diagnosis, outlining a strategy to protect family assets while ensuring Madison's continued support. The language was clinical, detached, discussing my future servitude as though it were a logical business decision. I photographed everything with trembling hands, then carefully returned the documents to their original positions. As I closed the filing cabinet, I noticed a small framed photo on my father's desk, Ethan in his graduation cap and gown, my parents beaming proudly on either side of him. I was nowhere to be seen in the image, though I had been at the ceremony, having driven 4 hours after working a double shift to make it on time. The betrayal wasn't a recent development or a desperate response to my father's illness. It had been the plan all along. Every childhood sacrifice, every unequal treatment, every dismissal of my ambitions, all stepping stones to this ultimate exploitation. As I left the house that day, something hardened within me. The dutiful daughter they had crafted so carefully was beginning to see the truth, and she was done being the family doormat. That night, I barely slept. Each time I closed my eyes, I heard my mother's casual dismissal, "We'll make Madison pay for everything." By morning, my devastation had crystallized into something sharper, colder. I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years and texted my mother that I wouldn't be able to take Dad to his therapy session. "Is everything okay?" She replied immediately. "Just feeling under the weather," I wrote back, marveling at how easily the lie came. "I'll check in tomorrow." Instead of resting, I drove to my best friend Rachel's apartment. Rachel and I had been friends since college, and she had always been skeptical of my family's treatment of me. "They take advantage of your good nature," she'd tell me, and I'd always defend them. Now I was about to admit she'd been right all along. Rachel opened her door, took one look at my face, and pulled me into a hug. What happened? The whole story poured out of me. The overheard conversation, the documents I'd found, the years of systematic manipulation. Rachel's expression shifted from concern to outrage. "You need to confront them right now," she insisted, already reaching for her car keys. "I'll drive you there myself." "This is financial abuse, Madison. It's disgusting." I shook my head. "I can't just confront them. Not yet. They've been planning this for years. I need to understand exactly what they've done and what my options are." Rachel reluctantly agreed. And we spent the day researching. We looked up filial responsibility laws in Oregon, examined the legal implications of the asset transfers, and made a list of professionals I should consult. Through it all, my phone buzzed with increasingly concerned messages from my mother. "Your father is asking for you. Are you taking your medication? You know how you get when you skip doses. Ethan's offering to take us out to dinner before he leaves tomorrow. Please join us." Each message was a fresh twist of the knife. The concern wasn't genuine. It was the shepherd checking on a valuable sheep. The next day, I met with Beverly Kim, a financial advisor Rachel had recommended. Beverly's office was warm and inviting, but her expression grew increasingly grave as I shared the documents I'd photographed and explained the situation. "What you're describing is elder financial planning, but with a troubling twist," she explained. "It's common for families to restructure assets to qualify for certain benefits or protect against estate taxes. What's uncommon is doing it secretly to burden one child while benefiting another." Beverly took me through the financial implications. The house transfer meant I would never inherit the home I'd been helping maintain. The medical accounts in my name meant I could be held responsible for thousands in treatments. The credit card charges constituted fraud, but would be difficult to dispute without creating family conflict. "The good news," Beverly said, "is that you've caught this relatively early. The bad news is that untangling it will likely change your family relationships forever." Are you prepared for that? Was I? The Madison who existed a week ago would have said no. Would have accepted any burden to keep family peace. But that Madison hadn't known she was being systematically exploited by the people who should have protected her. "I'm prepared," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. That weekend, I attended the family dinner Ethan had arranged before his return to New York. Sitting across from my brother at the upscale restaurant he'd selected, where he'd made it clear he was treating. In what I now recognized as a display of magnanimity rather than generosity, I studied him with new eyes. Ethan talked incessantly about his recent promotion. The bonus that would allow him to purchase that vacation property in Vail after all. He mentioned a charitable donation his firm had made, puffing with pride as though the corporate tax write-off somehow reflected his personal virtue. All the while, our father struggled to cut his steak, and our mother alternated between helping him and gazing adoringly at her successful son. "Madison's been so helpful with Dad's care," my mother said during a lull in Ethan's monologue. "We don't know what we'd do without her." "That's our Madison," Ethan replied with a condescending smile. "Always the responsible one." I forced myself to smile back, ball rising in my throat. "Family is family," I said, watching them nod in agreement with what they perceived as my accepting my designated role. After dinner, in the restaurant parking lot, I watched Ethan climb into his Tesla while I helped our father into my 10-year-old Honda. The contrast couldn't have been more stark, yet until this week, I'd accepted it as normal. As I drove my parents home, they chatted about how well Ethan was doing, how proud they were of his success. "He's offered to increase his monthly contribution," my father mentioned, "for my new treatments." "That's generous of him," I replied, wondering what the contribution actually amounted to compared to what they expected from me. "Well, he's very busy building his career," my mother added quickly. "His financial support is his way of helping since he can't be here in person." I nodded, saying nothing. After helping them into the house and making sure my father had taken his evening medication, I made my excuses and left. In my apartment, I discovered a new credit card statement with charges I hadn't made, medical copays, pharmacy bills, a stair lift installation deposit. The total came to just over $3,000. That was the moment my sadness transformed fully into resolve. They had crossed a line from emotional manipulation into outright theft. The decades of conditioning me to accept less, to expect less, to be grateful for less had led to this, them literally taking my money without consent. I canceled the credit card that night and requested a new one. Then I made a list of every financial account I had and began the process of removing my parents' access. By morning, I had a plan. This wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. It was about refusing to be the sacrifice my family had groomed me to be. As I finally fell into an exhausted sleep, I realized something important for the first time in my life. I was putting myself first, and it felt both terrifying and absolutely right. The Monday after Ethan returned to New York, I began implementing my plan. First, I called Michael Brennan, an elder law attorney Beverly had recommended. His office was in a converted Victorian in downtown Portland, the kind of place that spoke of both tradition and approachable expertise. "What you're describing is unfortunately more common than you might think," Michael said after I'd explained my situation. Families often designate a caretaker child without explicitly communicating it. The problem arises when that designation comes with exploitation rather than compensation. "What are my options?" I asked. "Several," he replied. "First, we document everything: the care you've provided, the expenses you've covered, the promises made to you. Then we create clear boundaries going forward." I took notes as Michael outlined a strategy that was both legally sound and emotionally manageable. No dramatic confrontations. No burning bridges. Just a methodical reclaiming of my autonomy and financial security. "What about the credit card charges?" I asked. "That's theft, isn't it?" Michael nodded gravely. "It is. But prosecuting your parents for fraud would be emotionally costly and might not yield the results you want. Instead, I suggest documenting the unauthorized charges as part of our overall strategy. I've always processed difficult emotions through organization, so creating the documentation Michael requested became my therapy. I created spreadsheets tracking every hour I'd spent caregiving, every dollar I'd contributed, every milestone in my career I'd sacrificed to be available for my parents. The numbers were staggering. Over the past 5 years, I'd provided more than 8,000 hours of unpaid care and contributed nearly $40,000 toward household expenses and medical bills. If you're still watching my story, you probably understand what it's like when family takes advantage of your kindness. The moment you realize all those sacrifices weren't appreciated but expected is earth-shattering. Have you ever had to completely rethink your relationship with the people who should love you most? Let me know in the comments if you've been through something similar. Now, let me tell you how I started reclaiming my life. Next, I consulted with Dr. Phillips, my father's neurologist, explaining that I needed clarity on his treatment options and insurance coverage. Without revealing the family drama, I asked specific questions about the experimental treatments my parents had discussed. "Your father's insurance would actually cover 60% of the protocol," Dr. Phillips explained, looking confused. "I discussed this with your parents last month. The out-of-pocket would be significant, but not nearly as high as paying completely out of pocket." This revelation wasn't surprising, but still stung. They had lied about the coverage to justify extracting more money from me. And are there other treatments, perhaps more conventional ones, that would be fully covered? I asked. Dr. Phillips nodded. Several options have shown promising results and would be covered at 80 to 90%. They're not as potentially groundbreaking as the experimental protocol, but they're proven effective at symptom management. I thanked him and requested copies of all treatment options and their associated costs and coverage rates. For my records, I explained. Armed with this information, I moved to the next phase of my plan. I purchased a small digital recorder and began documenting conversations with my parents. Oregon is a one-party consent state for recordings, making this completely legal. I wasn't proud of the subterfuge, but I needed evidence of their intentions. Creating opportunities for revealing conversations wasn't difficult. My mother had always been remarkably candid about their expectations of me when we were alone. I'm concerned about the new treatment costs, I mentioned while helping her with laundry. It seems like a lot to manage on top of everything else. You've always been so good with money, she replied, folding one of my father's sweaters. And it's not like you have a family of your own to support. Ethan has his future to think about, the houses, the eventual children. Your contribution is taking care of us. The recorder in my pocket captured every word. With my father, I took a different approach. Dad, I've been thinking about my future. Maybe going back for an advanced degree or buying a house instead of renting. His response was immediate and revealing. That seems rather selfish timing, doesn't it? With my condition requiring more care? Your mother, and I always assumed you'd be here for us. It's why we never pressured you about marriage or moving away like we did with Ethan. Someone needs to be the family caretaker. Each recorded conversation was another piece of evidence showing their deliberate strategy to make me the family sacrifice. Meanwhile, I began systematically withdrawing my freely given time and resources. I still took my father to essential medical appointments, but stopped doing their grocery shopping. I visited 3 times a week instead of daily. I stopped paying for medications without discussion. The reaction was swift and telling. We've been waiting for 2 days for someone to pick up my prescription, my father complained during my Wednesday visit. I thought Ethan was increasing his contribution, I replied mildly. Perhaps he could arrange a delivery service. My mother looked shocked. Your brother is very busy. You know that. I'm actually quite busy myself, I said. The words feeling foreign but empowering. I've picked up extra clients at the rehabilitation center. This wasn't actually true yet, but it soon would be. I'd already spoken with my supervisor about increasing my hours and taking on private clients. As I created distance, my parents' attempts to pull me back intensified. My mother called daily with minor emergencies. My father's texts became increasingly guilt-inducing, reminding me of all they'd sacrificed for me growing up, a narrative I now recognized as deeply distorted. We gave you everything we could, he wrote after I declined to come over on a Saturday. We never expected our daughter to abandon us when we needed her most. The irony was painful. They had never given me everything they could, that had always been reserved for Ethan. What they had given me was just enough to keep me functional in my role as their future caretaker. Ethan's reaction to my gradual withdrawal was the most revealing. When our parents began calling him with needs I was no longer fulfilling, his irritation was palpable even from across the country. What's going on with you? He demanded during a rare direct call to me. Mom says you're barely helping anymore. I'm establishing some boundaries, I replied. I have my own life to manage. Boundaries? He sounded genuinely confused by the concept. There are parents, Madison. They need help. Yes, they do, I agreed. And I've been providing that help, almost exclusively, for years. Now it's time for a more equitable arrangement. There was a long pause before he responded. I send money. You know I can't just drop everything and move back to Portland. No one's asking you to. But perhaps the financial contribution could better reflect the actual needs and your actual capacity. Another pause. What exactly are you saying? I'm saying that I've been subsidizing our parents' care, with both time and money, at the expense of my own financial security and future. That arrangement is changing. The spluttering that followed would have been comical if the situation weren't so painful. Ethan, who had never had to consider anyone's needs above his own, was confronted with the possibility that his comfortable arrangement, minimal financial contribution, 0 time commitment, maximum inheritance, might be in jeopardy. As my family scrambled to adjust to the new reality, I continued building my support network. Rachel introduced me to her cousin Jennifer, who had experienced a similar situation with her siblings regarding their grandfather's care. The rehabilitation center connected me with a support group for family caregivers, where I met others who had learned the hard way about setting boundaries. The guilt is designed to control you, explained Eleanor, A woman in her 60s who had cared for both parents while her brothers contributed nothing. Once you recognize it as a tool rather than a truth, it loses power over you. By the end of the month, I had moved my money to new accounts, established a clear schedule of when I was available to help my parents, and compiled a comprehensive record of the care imbalance over the years. My parents' confusion was evolving into panic as they realized their carefully constructed system was crumbling, while Ethan's increasingly frantic calls suggested he was beginning to understand that his inheritance might come with unexpected responsibilities. The family that had taken me for granted for decades was finally seeing me clearly, not as the perpetual giver they had molded, but as a woman reclaiming her right to self-determination. The reckoning was coming, and for the first time in my life, I was the one setting the terms. After 6 weeks of methodical preparation, I was ready for the confrontation. I selected a Sunday afternoon, knowing Ethan would be flying in that morning. My mother had mentioned his visit repeatedly, clearly hoping his presence would help bring me back in line. I arranged for the meeting to take place at my parents' home, in the living room where so many family discussions had occurred over the years. I arrived 15 minutes early, my portfolio of evidence tucked under my arm, my heart pounding, but my resolve firm. Rachel had offered to come with me, but I declined. This was a family matter, and I needed to handle it on my own terms. My parents seemed relieved to see me, perhaps thinking my early arrival signaled a return to my previous accommodating self. My father sat in his recliner, his hands trembling slightly but his eyes alert. My mother hovered nearby, straightening already straight cushions. Ethan arrived 10 minutes late, his expression suggesting this family meeting was an inconvenience in his busy schedule. "Thank you all for being here," I began once everyone was seated. "I've called this meeting because we need to discuss Dad's care going forward, as well as some financial matters that have recently come to my attention." "If this is about the prescription deliveries, I've already set up an account," Ethan interjected. "They'll be delivered weekly now." Problem solved. I smiled tightly. "That's helpful. But it's just one small piece of what we need to discuss." From my portfolio, I withdrew a document I had prepared, a comprehensive breakdown of the care our father required weekly, the time commitment involved, and the associated costs if provided by professional caregivers rather than family members. As you can see, Dad needs approximately 38 hours of assistance weekly. For the past 5 years, I have provided 35 of those hours. The monetary value of that care, if provided professionally, would be approximately $42,000 annually. My mother's face paled. My father studied his trembling hands. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. Additionally, I continued, "I've contributed an average of $8,000 yearly toward household expenses and medical costs not covered by insurance." I slid another document across the coffee table, a spreadsheet detailing every payment I'd made. "Madison, is this really necessary?" My mother interrupted. "We're family. We don't keep score like this." "Actually, you do," I replied, my voice steady. "You've been keeping very careful score. You've just never shown me the true tally." I removed my digital recorder from my bag and pressed play. My mother's voice filled the room. "Your contribution is taking care of us." Then my father's. "Someone needs to be the family caretaker." I let the recording play for 2 more minutes, capturing their most revealing statements about the family arrangement they had engineered. When I finally pressed stop, the silence in the room was absolute. "Where did you get that?" my father finally asked, his voice barely audible. "I recorded our conversations over the past month," I replied. Legally, I might add. But these recent conversations only confirmed what I learned 6 weeks ago. I described the conversation I had overheard that Sunday morning, their casual discussion of making me pay for everything, the revelation about transferring assets to Ethan, their dismissal of my financial struggles and future security. "You designed our entire family dynamic around this plan," I concluded. "Ethan was raised to expect everything. I was raised to expect nothing but responsibility." "That's not fair," my mother protested, but the objection sounded hollow even to her own ears. "It's completely fair," I countered, removing the photocopies I'd made of the documents from my father's office. "These tell a very clear story. One child designated for success and inheritance, the other for service and sacrifice. Ethan, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. "This is ridiculous. You're making it sound like some kind of conspiracy. Mom and Dad were just planning for the future. A future where you receive all the assets and I receive all the burdens," I said. "Yes, I understand the plan perfectly. What I don't understand is why you all thought I would never figure it out or stand up for myself." My mother's strategy shifted from denial to tears. "We only wanted what was best for the family. Your father's condition, the medical costs, we were trying to protect what little we have. By committing fraud with my credit card? By lying about insurance coverage? By systematically transferring every asset away from me while expecting me to cover increasing expenses?" The calm I had maintained began to crack. "That's not protection. That's exploitation." My father, whose Parkinson's symptoms often worsened under stress, was visibly trembling now. "Madison, you've always been the responsible one, the nurturing one. Ethan has different strengths. We were playing to both your natural abilities." "My natural abilities didn't include being the family doormat," I replied. "That was a role you assigned me and reinforced at every opportunity." Ethan stood abruptly. "This is insane. I work 60-hour weeks building a career that will eventually benefit all of us. You live 15 minutes away and help out. Both contributions matter." "Both contributions should matter equally," I agreed. "But they don't, do they? Your contribution is rewarded with assets, inheritance, and praise. Mine is expected, taken for granted, and compensated with more demands." My mother reached for my hand, which I carefully moved away. "Darling, what do you want from us? We're doing the best we can with a difficult situation." "I want equity," I said simply. "I want acknowledgement of the care I've provided and the sacrifices I've made. I want a fair division of responsibility going forward, both time and financial. And I want the fraudulent credit card charges reversed." The family meeting devolved from there. My mother cycled between tears and accusations of selfishness. My father retreated into a grieved silence. Ethan alternated between dismissing my concerns and attempting to reframe them as a simple misunderstanding. "You're making a mountain out of a molehill," he insisted. "So they used your credit card a few times. So what? Family helps family. Would you be saying so what if they had charged $3,000 to your card without asking?" I countered. His silence was answer enough. As the afternoon wore on, our conversation attracted attention from extended family. My Aunt Patricia, my father's sister, stopped by unexpectedly and walked into the middle of our confrontation. Rather than leave, she stayed, her expression growing increasingly troubled as she pieced together what was happening. "Harold," she finally interrupted, addressing my father. "Is this true? Have you and Diane been planning to burden Madison with all your care while protecting assets for Ethan?" My father couldn't meet his sister's eyes. "It's more complicated than that, Pat." "It sounds pretty straightforward to me," she replied, turning to me with new understanding in her eyes. "No wonder you've been looking so exhausted these past few years." By evening, word had spread to other family members. My cousin Thomas called, then my mother's sister Barbara. Family friends who had been aware of my caregiving role but not the exploitation behind it began reaching out with messages of support. The carefully constructed narrative my parents had built of a harmonious family arrangement where everyone contributed according to their abilities was crumbling under scrutiny. As the confrontation reached its third hour, I laid out my ultimatum. "Going forward, there are two options," I said, my voice hoarse from the emotional marathon. "Either we establish a fair arrangement for Dad's care, with equitable time and financial contributions from both Ethan and me, or I step back completely." "Step back," my mother repeated, aghast. "You can't possibly mean that." "I do," I confirmed. "I'm willing to continue helping, but only as part of a balanced family effort. If that's not possible, then I'll limit my involvement to occasional visits, like any distant family member would do." "You'd abandon your father when he needs you most?" Her voice was a blend of disbelief and calculated guilt. "I'm not abandoning anyone," I replied. "I'm declining to be the sole support for a family that has deliberately planned to exploit me." "There's a difference." My father, who had been mostly silent, finally spoke up. Madison is right. The words seemed to physically pain him. I have taken advantage of her willingness to help. That was wrong. My mother stared at him in shock. Ethan looked equally stunned. What are you saying, Harold? My mother demanded. I'm saying we need to do better, my father replied, his voice strengthening despite his trembling hands. Madison has been carrying this family for years while we've been planning to leave her nothing for her efforts. It's not right. The admission, partial though it was, felt like the first honest exchange I'd had with my father in years. It wasn't a complete acceptance of responsibility, but it was a start. So what happens now? Ethan asked, his confident facade finally cracking to reveal genuine uncertainty. Now, I said, gathering my documents, you all discuss how you want to proceed. I've outlined what I need for continued involvement. The choice is yours. I stood to leave, emotionally drained but strangely peaceful. I had spoken my truth, presented my evidence, and stated my boundaries. What happened next was up to them. You're just leaving? After dropping all this on us, my mother asked incredulously. Yes, I replied. I've been carrying this family's emotional and practical burdens for years. For tonight, at least, they're yours to carry. As I walked out the door, the silence behind me was deafening. No one volunteered to step up. No one called me back with a solution. And somehow, that absence of response was the final confirmation I needed that my decision was the right one. In my car, I finally allowed myself to cry, not from sadness this time, but from relief. The truth was finally out in the open, and whatever happened next, I would face it on my own terms. The immediate aftermath of my confrontation was a strange, echoing silence. For 3 days, my phone remained eerily quiet, no desperate calls from my mother. No guilt-inducing texts from my father, no demanding messages from Ethan. On the 4th day, my Aunt Patricia called. Your parents are in crisis mode, she informed me. Your father missed his therapy appointment yesterday because no one remembered to schedule the transportation. I felt a pang of concern but reminded myself this wasn't my emergency to fix. What about Ethan? He's still in town, isn't he? He left the morning after your confrontation, Patricia said. Claimed he had an urgent work situation. Your mother has been calling neighbors for help. The old Madison would have rushed over immediately, guilt overwhelming boundaries. The new Madison took a deep breath. That's unfortunate. I hope they're able to find the support they need. Patricia's approval was evident in her voice. For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. What they were planning. It wasn't fair to you. Never has been. Over the next 2 weeks, the family's carefully constructed caregiving system, which had essentially been me, collapsed entirely. My mother called eventually, her voice tight with stress. Your father fell yesterday trying to get into the shower. We need you, Madison. I'm sorry to hear that, I replied. Genuinely concerned but firm. Has his doctor been notified? Did you call Ethan? Ethan is in New York, she said, as though this explained everything. He can't just drop his life to come help. Neither can I pointed out. Not anymore. Not without a fair arrangement. The conversation ended abruptly, but it was the first of many. Each call followed a similar pattern, a crisis. An implicit or explicit demand for my immediate assistance, and my calm redirection to other resources or family members. Meanwhile, I was rebuilding my own life. I increased my hours at the rehabilitation center and took on private clients. I joined a hiking group that met on Saturdays, a day previously dedicated entirely to my parents' needs. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Renee Foster, who specialized in family dynamics and caregiver stress. What you're experiencing is a common but rarely discussed phenomenon, Dr. Foster explained during one session. The designated family caregiver often doesn't realize they've been groomed for the role their entire lives. Breaking that pattern is extraordinarily difficult, but essential for your well-being. 3 weeks after our confrontation, Ethan finally called me directly. This has gone far enough. He began without preamble. Mom is exhausted, Dad's condition is worsening from the stress, and I can't keep flying back and forth from New York every time there's a problem. That sounds challenging, I replied, employing the neutral language Dr. Foster had recommended for these conversations. Challenging? It's impossible. I have a career, Madison. Important responsibilities. So do I reminded him. Which is why I suggested an equitable arrangement. There was a long pause before he responded, his voice unusually subdued. I don't know how to do what you do. The patient, nurturing thing. I'm not built for it. It was perhaps the most honest thing my brother had ever said to me. No one is naturally built for caregiving, Ethan. It's a skill like any other. You learn it by doing it, often imperfectly at first. I can increase my financial contribution, he offered. Significantly. That would help, I acknowledged. But money alone isn't enough. Dad needs time, attention, physical assistance. Those things can't all be outsourced without astronomical expense. For the first time in our adult lives, Ethan and I had a real conversation about our parents' needs and our respective roles in meeting them. It wasn't an immediate resolution, but it was a beginning. The financial reality of professional care quickly became apparent to my family. Without my free labor, they were facing costs of over $4,000 monthly for even basic assistance. The assets they had transferred to Ethan's name, intended to be protected from potential medical expenses, were now being liquidated to cover immediate care needs. My mother called me in tears one evening. We've had to cash in one of the investment accounts. The one that was supposed to help Ethan with a down payment on the Vale property. I didn't point out the irony. I didn't need to. Meanwhile, word of our family situation had spread through our extended family and social circle. My cousin Jennifer, who had experienced similar treatment from her siblings regarding their grandfather's care, called to offer support. The family is divided, she reported. Some think you're selfish for stepping back. Others are appalled at how you've been treated. Aunt Barbara is firmly in your corner, by the way. Says she always thought the way your parents favored Ethan was unhealthy. The external perspective was validating but also painful. The family dysfunction I had normalized for so long was now visible to everyone, impossible to ignore or minimize. Dr. Foster helped me navigate the complex emotions that arose during this period, the guilt that still surfaced despite my best efforts, the anger that sometimes threatened to overwhelm my resolve. The grief for the loving family I had thought I had. You're mourning the loss of an illusion, she explained. The family you thought you had, the one that valued your contributions and had your best interests at heart, never truly existed. That's a profound loss. Even if what you're gaining is healthier and more authentic. 6 weeks after our confrontation, my Aunt Patricia invited me to lunch. Over soup and sandwiches at her favorite cafe. She shared her own experience. Your father and I grew up in a similar dynamic, she revealed. I was the responsible one, the one who stayed close to home. Harold was encouraged to pursue opportunities elsewhere. When our parents needed care, guess who was expected to provide it? You, I said, recognizing the pattern. Me, she confirmed. I gave up a promising career in library science to care for them. Your father visited twice a year and was praised for his generosity. Sound familiar? The generational pattern was both illuminating and disturbing. Did you ever confront them about it? Patricia shook her head. Not like you did. I accepted it as my lot in life. Watching you stand up for yourself, it's been inspiring, Madison. Painful to witness the fallout, but inspiring nonetheless. As I built my new life with healthier boundaries, my parents and Ethan were forced to adjust to the new reality. They hired a part-time home health aide, who quickly proved insufficient for my father's needs. They looked into assisted living facilities, but balked at the cost. Ethan took a 2-week leave from work to help sort out arrangements, experiencing for the first time the exhausting reality of day-to-day caregiving. How did you do this for 5 years? He asked me during a rare moment of vulnerability. I'm completely drained after 2 weeks. One day at a time, I replied. And with very little recognition or support. His discomfort with this truth was evident, but he didn't dispute it. 3 months after our confrontation, my mother called with an unexpected request. We'd like to meet with you. All of us. With a professional mediator present. The old Madison would have immediately agreed, eager to restore family harmony at any cost. The new Madison was more cautious. What's the purpose of this meeting? To find a way forward, she said. As a family. I agreed, with conditions. The meeting would take place at a neutral location, not their home, where old patterns could too easily reassert themselves. The mediator would be someone with experience in elder care issues, not just general family therapy. And I would bring someone from my support system. I chose Rachel, to help me maintain perspective. The fact that my parents agreed to these terms was the first indication that something had genuinely shifted in our family dynamic. 6 months after the Sunday morning that changed everything, I sat in a conference room at the community center, waiting for my family to arrive. Rachel sat beside me, a steady presence in what promised to be an emotionally charged meeting. Dr. Lydia Chen, the elder care mediator we had selected, organized her materials at the head of the table. Remember, Rachel whispered, you've already won by establishing boundaries. Whatever happens today doesn't change that. My parents entered first, my father moving more steadily than I had expected. His tremor was still evident, but less pronounced. My mother looked older somehow, the strain of the past months evident in new lines around her eyes. Ethan arrived last, his designer suit replaced by casual clothes, his usual confident swagger subdued. Thank you all for coming, Dr. Chin began once everyone was settled. Madison has explained the general situation to me, but I'd like to hear from each of you about your perspective on what's happened and what you hope to achieve today. My mother spoke first, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. I made mistakes in how we handled things. I see that now. We took Madison's help for granted and made plans that weren't fair to her. It wasn't a full acknowledgement of the deliberate exploitation, but it was more than I had expected. My father's turn came next. I followed a pattern I saw in my own parents, expecting my daughter to sacrifice while protecting my son. It wasn't right then. And it's not right now. Ethan shifted uncomfortably before speaking. I benefited from an unfair system without questioning it. That was wrong of me. When my turn came, I spoke clearly and directly. I contributed to this dynamic by accepting it for so long. But I'm no longer willing to be the family sacrifice. I want a relationship with all of you, but only if it's based on mutual respect and equitable responsibility. Dr. Chin guided us through a structured conversation about my father's care needs, the financial resources available to meet those needs, and a fair division of responsibility. The discussion was difficult, with old tensions resurfacing periodically. But the mediator kept us focused on practical solutions rather than recriminations. By the end of the 3-hour session, we had the framework of an agreement. Ethan would contribute 30% of his annual bonus, a substantial sum, toward a professional care service for our father. I would provide 10 hours weekly of personal assistance, a significant reduction from my previous 35 hours, but still a meaningful contribution. My parents would reverse the fraudulent credit card charges and acknowledge my right to prioritize my own financial security and future. Most significantly, the asset transfers would be partially unwound. The family home would remain in the trust, but with both Ethan and me as equal beneficiaries. The investment accounts would be restructured to provide for our father's care first, with any remainder to be divided equally. This is a beginning, Dr. Chin emphasized as we signed the written agreement. Rebuilding trust takes time and consistent action. I recommend monthly check-ins for the first year to address any issues that arise. As we prepared to leave, my father asked if he could speak with me privately. My mother and Ethan headed to the parking lot while I sat back down across from him. I'm sorry, Madison, he said simply, his eyes meeting mine directly for the first time in months. I convinced myself I was doing what was best for the family, but I was really just perpetuating what was done to my sister. You deserved better from me. From all of us. The straightforward apology, without qualifications or excuses, was perhaps the most healing moment of the entire process. Thank you for saying that, Dad. Your boundaries forced us to find better solutions, he continued. The new medication regimen Dr. Phillips developed is actually working better than the experimental treatment would have. And the professional caregivers know techniques I never would have asked you to learn. I nodded. noticing for the first time that his tremor had indeed improved. "I'm glad things are working out." "They are," he agreed. "Not despite your stepping back, but because of it." In the months that followed our mediated agreement, our family dynamic continued to evolve. My relationship with my parents transformed into something more balanced, still loving, but no longer defined by sacrifice and obligation. I visited weekly for Sunday dinner, helped with specific tasks rather than assuming general responsibility, and found I actually enjoyed our time together now that it was freely chosen rather than demanded. Ethan's transformation was perhaps the most surprising. The experience of briefly stepping into the caregiver role had profoundly affected him. He visited more frequently, set up video calls with our father several times weekly, and developed a genuine interest in Parkinson's research. The entitled golden child began evolving into a more compassionate, aware adult. "I never really saw them as whole people before," he admitted during one of his visits. "Just as, I don't know, parents. Support systems. It's different when you actually see their vulnerability up close." My own life flourished as I reclaimed my time and resources. I received a promotion at the rehabilitation center, moving into a specialized role working with Parkinson's patients. Ironically, my experience with my father had given me unique insights into their needs. I moved from my cramped apartment to a small but charming bungalow, my first step toward building real financial security. More importantly, I developed relationships that weren't based on what I could give or do for others. Rachel and I planned a weekend trip to the coast, my first actual vacation in years. I joined a book club and a community garden. I even began dating again, meeting Michael, a kind and self-sufficient high school science teacher who valued partnership over caretaking. On the anniversary of the confrontation that had changed everything, we held another family meeting, this time at my new home, around my dining table. There was no mediator present. No formal agenda, just a family having dinner and taking stock of the year's changes. "I never thought I'd say this," my mother admitted as we cleared the dishes, "but things are better now. Not easier, necessarily, but healthier. For everyone," I agreed. Watching through the window as Ethan showed our father a gardening technique he'd learned from his building's rooftop garden in New York. Later that evening, I helped my father with his exercises, the physical therapy routine that was now a choice rather than an obligation. His movements were stronger than they had been a year ago, his spirits visibly higher. "I'm proud of you, Madison," he said unexpectedly as we finished the routine. "Not just for helping me now, but for standing up for yourself then. It took courage I'm not sure I would have had in your position." The words were a healing balm to the part of me that had always longed for his approval, but no longer needed it to feel complete. As my family departed that evening, my parents to their home with its evening care attendant, Ethan to his hotel before his flight back to New York, I stood on my porch and felt a profound sense of peace. The journey had been painful, the confrontation terrifying. But the result was a life reclaimed and a family transformed. The betrayal I had discovered that Sunday morning a year ago had nearly destroyed me. But in forcing me to advocate for myself, it had ultimately led to something I had never imagined possible, a family based on mutual respect rather than exploitation, and a life that belonged truly and fully to me. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear about your own experiences with family dynamics and how you've navigated difficult situations. Have you ever had to set boundaries with loved ones? Did it change your relationships for better or worse? Leave a comment below and share your journey. And if you found value in my story, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more stories about family relationships, personal growth, and finding your worth. I truly believe that by sharing these difficult experiences, we help others feel less alone in their struggles. Thank you for staying with me through this long and emotional journey. Sometimes the hardest lessons lead to the most important growth. I hope my story gives you courage if you're facing similar challenges with your own family.